Well, I first want to say thank you to the Chamber for inviting us out here today to be a part of that. Obviously, automotive is a signature industry for the state, and we're delighted to talk about that. The positioning is interesting. We are between a very inspiring story from Rusty about Eastern Kentucky and lunch. So, boys, we better do a good job. But all three of us represent in some way, certainly the automotive industry here in the state of Kentucky, but also the Kentucky Automotive Industry Association. It's a statewide trade association group designed to represent the interests of the automotive manufacturers throughout the Commonwealth. And as the executive director, of course, I have the majority of that responsibility. But both Doug and Kurt are board members with me. We made a video a couple of years ago that kind of explains our purpose. It has a little bit of data. Some players in the video are no longer with us, but I think that it does a great job of explaining who we are and what we are and why we exist. So, Ray, if we could go ahead and start that video for our audience, it'd be great.
We've got to create a brand, an identity for Kentucky that says this is a great place to do automotive. Well, I'm really excited. It's finally a good time for everyone to come together and collaborate and share ideas on how we continue to grow the automotive industry in the state of Kentucky, but also learn from each other so that not only are we promoting the state of Kentucky, but we continue to be successful. I think it has the opportunity to truly represent the automotive interests of the state. It's terrific to have the support of the government.
Our charter in order to have this got to stand aside with our partners. We're going to create our own bylaws. Hopefully, in the years to come, you're going to see a strong voice giving a clear vision of what the automotive industry is doing for the state now, and what it can do for the state, and really how it relates to the automotive industry, which is really a global issue now.
So it's really our opportunity to run the Automotive Industry Association in the way such an association should be run. We've got 460 businesses already located in Kentucky, with more considering us every day. I think we can make the next great automotive club right here in Commonwealth.
We really are pushing hard for our plant to localize more suppliers into our region, and this association will help us get there.
I think the collaborative effort is actually going to bring focus and emphasis to what the automotive industry in Kentucky is all about. Being the third largest auto producer in the United States is probably one of the best kept secrets, and hopefully through this program of the association, it's going to highlight our capabilities here in Commonwealth.
And climb up to maybe from number 3 to number 4.
I think we've got our eyes focused on the right thing. I think we understand the business climate that needs to get created. I think we understand the worker climate that needs to get created. I think we understand all the moving pieces working together to make the industry be successful. And I'm excited to be a part of it for the future. AAI is very imperative for our state's future. We have a good opportunity to continue to build upon the automotive industry that's already been established here. And so why not use the association as a means of doing that? I think the association play a very significant role with every business associated with the automotive industry.
What does everyone want out of the Kentucky Automotive Industry Association? One of the top priorities for everyone is
there are issues that go across the spectrum that matters to everyone, no matter what the size or the scope or the scale is of their operation in Commonwealth. I think we can bring a common voice to that that's going to be valuable. Small suppliers are probably one of the biggest benefactors of this effort. This actually gives them an opportunity to have a seat at the table, have a voice in the industry, and actually strengthen everything that we're all trying to do together. Everybody's got to be on board for this thing. We want to speak with a common voice, send a clear message to the industry, a clear message to the governments, both local, state, national, and global, who it is that we want to be. And we need to be all in that together. The possibilities are endless. So the more energy, the more enthusiasm, the more partners we get at the table, the better off we all become. This is an exciting time for the state of Kentucky and the automotive industry.
So since the time of that video, we have in fact done that. We have become a unified voice. We have become the common advocate for the automotive industry in the state of Kentucky. Early on, when I assumed this position, as I traveled to different parts of the country to represent the Kentucky automotive industry, they would look at me and say, "What's Kentucky doing here?" And now they say, "What's going on in Kentucky?" It's a fascinating time to be a part of our business. It's a fascinating time to be a part of our business here in the Commonwealth, and I'm privileged to do that. A couple of updates from the information that was presented in the video. There are now over 490 different manufacturing firms located in the state of Kentucky, employing over 90,000 of our Kentuckians in those jobs in the automotive sector. We contribute over $14 billion a year to the state GDP. And we actually, our payroll amounts to over $6 billion of money infused into our local economies throughout the state. You heard earlier from Bill that Kentucky is the third largest state in the country with respect to automotive production, behind only Michigan and Ohio. Somebody asked me what would it take to get to be number 2, and if GM could burp at the Lordstown plant in Ohio, we could maybe catch him. But 1 out of every 18 jobs in the state is an automotive job. Interestingly, there are 120 counties in the state of Kentucky, as you all know. 80 of them have an automotive manufacturing plant in them. You can guess, perhaps, the ones that don't, but I'm going to tell you that, and we've heard it here, this infrastructure issue is a huge issue to us, and we'll probably get to that during the course of our discussion. So let's go get started, guys. Rusty covered a little bit of it, but Doug, why don't you give us a scope of Hitachi's operations here in Kentucky?
Yes, sir. Good morning, everyone. I'm with, again, Hitachi Automotive Systems Americas. I'm responsible for the manufacturing plants here in the U.S., also logistics and purchasing in Mexico and the U.S. But if you look at Hitachi more from a global perspective, we have about 63 companies located in 5 different regions. Those regions being Japan, Asia, China, Europe, and North America. Again, about 40,000 employees in all of those regions. If we look at just the Americas region alone, we have just under 7,000 employees in Mexico and the U.S. And of that, we have about 9 companies in the Americas. 3 of those are located here in Kentucky, and just under 3,000 employees here in Kentucky. Looking at the factories in Kentucky, we have the Harrodsburg, Kentucky factory, which is established in 1985. I think just 1 year, maybe even before Toyota. So 1985. A very diverse product base at that facility. We have electronic control manufacturing, for example, engine control modules, transmission control modules, various different types of four-wheel drive, all-wheel drive traction control modules. We have power steering control modules. We do even now battery control modules for the lithium-ion battery pack assemblies that we do there in Harrodsburg. We also have mass airflow sensors, electronic throttle bodies, direct injection fuel systems, and all of those products. Of course, we ship some of that product here in Kentucky to the 3 OEMs. If we look, 2 more factories in Kentucky. They're located in Berea, Madison County. The second also belongs to the same powertrain division as the Harrodsburg plant. We do hybrid electric motors for GM. It's a newer factory, 2014. It was established to provide the hybrid electric motor for the Chevy Volt. Now we're doing the next generation. Just up the street is the drive control or chassis division for us. That factory we call Berea, Kentucky factory. It's been there since 1987, and we provide suspension and brake components for Ford being the #1 customer, but also Toyota, also everyone. So that's a little bit about our company from globally.
Thanks, man.
Yes, sir.
Kurt, how about INOAC?
Sure, Dave. Thanks very much. Good morning, everyone. I can tell you it's actually warmer up here than it was when I was sitting back.
Yeah, thank God. You can hang meat out there.
Yeah, a little bit about INOAC. So 26,000 team members throughout the world. Founded again, as we mentioned during the introductions, as a private company, still family owned. Second generation owns the business and are very much involved in our day-to-day operations. Speaking specifically here within North America, not only do we have privately held operations, we also have a number of joint venture businesses as well within the automotive sector. We're in various facets of the components. In Kentucky, we are primarily on interiors, so headrests, armrests, instrument panels, commonly referred to as dashboards, grip assist, center seat consoles, and then the various and other plastic components that go under the hood and also within the passenger compartment. In terms of other operations within Kentucky, We do have our first business that was actually established in North America is located in Bardstown, Kentucky. It's non-automotive. That's a company that actually produces heavy-walled PET bottles that look like plastic, given the quality of the resins that we use. One of our largest customers there is Estee Lauder and their 23 brands. So for those of you who are familiar with Estee Lauder and Clinique and all their products, those bottles are made primarily in Bardstown, Kentucky. Short runs are done in our Monterrey, Mexico plant. So we're sort of in interior automotive, plastics and bottles. We make polyurethane foam in New Jersey. And then on the exterior of the automobiles with a joint venture partner, both in Ohio and Tennessee, we do body side moldings and spoilers as well. So pretty diverse business.
I walked into Kurt's plant one day, the first time I'd ever visited INOAC, and I said, what are these makeup bottles doing in here? I'm an automotive guy. So when we started talking, when Jim first contacted me about doing this session, we of course thought about, Toyota, Ford, and GM, our three OEMs here in the state of Kentucky. And the more we talked, the reality is that the automotive industry is really, those are sort of the flagship, products produced in Kentucky related to automotive, but there is so much more to automotive than our three OEMs. Not to say anything against them, we're all here because of them. It's a great thing. But I really wanted you all to get a feel for the scope and scale of the automotive industry in the state of Kentucky. So I asked two of our major Tier 1 suppliers to come in and be a part of the discussion. So thanks to both you guys for doing that. One of the huge impacts that the automotive industry has is on exports here out of the state of Kentucky. How about Hitachi and exports from Kentucky plants?
Actually, exports are very low for us. We really focus more on building the manufacturing plant near the customer.
Okay.
So for us, we have less than 10% export from our Kentucky facilities, and that primarily goes to our customers in Mexico and Canada.
Okay. Yeah. How about you, Kurt?
We're probably higher than that, probably around 50% are probably exports.
Yeah.
And again, we like Hitachi, tried to build our facilities near our customers, near the OEMs. And obviously, as you mentioned earlier, that infrastructure and roadways has a significant role in kind of how we make our decisions.
You bet. Okay, so the number one export business from the state of Kentucky is what? Anyone guess? Aerospace. Thank you, Tanita. The number two export business in the state of Kentucky is automotive. We export over $6 billion worth of automotive parts and components out of our state offshore every year. So when you think about the global automotive industry, Kentucky we aren't just supplying Kentucky. We are a global player in the automotive industry. Okay, as we begin to think about our discussion here on automotive, we have obviously been blessed in the state of Kentucky with some recent announcements. Back, about a year and a half ago, General Motors announced about a $440 million investment in a brand new paint shop at the Corvette plant. I was bummed out. I was hoping to get that while I was still there, but we spent about $300 million while I was there. But Toyota just announced a $1.3 billion investment. Will reminded me that I said 1.3 once, and Will James said no, 1.33, Dave. $1 billion investment at the Georgetown complex, and Ford just announced a $900 million investment in Louisville. Obviously, that's good news for those companies. How do you guys view that stuff, Kurt? I mean, how does the supplier community view that kind of investment in the state of Kentucky?
Obviously, for us, it's a huge plus. I've been with the company for just over 6 years, and speaking specifically about our growth within Kentucky, not only from revenue but also from team member and workforce development, we've grown by more than 50% in terms of our team member population. We've invested, again, last 6 years, almost $35 million in capital and infrastructure. That, of course, is much different from what we had from some of our legacy equipment, which was traditional injection molding machines and those types of things. But what we've done, we've grown the workforce by about 50%. We continue to do that, and that has, of course, as you develop a new workforce and you introduce a new workforce, that, of course, brings on new and additional challenges.
You bet.
But to the extent, and we work directly with 2 of the 3 OEMs here in Kentucky, so that's obviously a good thing for us. One of the most recent projects that we launched last year We produce all the instrument panels for all of the Ford heavy-duty pickup trucks that are made out of the Ford truck plant here in Louisville. We're also making the headrests for the ES350 Lexus product that's produced out of Georgetown. So anytime the OEMs make those types of announcements, we're certainly very excited to be part of that and always looking for ways to partner with them even further.
Yeah. How about you, Doug? What's your perspective?
Yeah, I think anytime, of course, when our customer makes investments, increases, it's great for us, of course. I think for us, we ship products to all three plants. Two of the three companies in Kentucky, Ford and GM, are two of our top three customers. So it's always important for us when we see that type of growth. But for example, in Kentucky, we've actually built 2 new factories. And we've actually increased about 600 people in the last 5 years. So for us, I think you see that trickle-down effect. As our customer makes investments, as they expand, we do the same thing. So absolutely, it's great for us as well.
Yeah, one could argue that the epicenter of the automotive business is moving south. You've all heard the news about all the OEMs locating in Mexico and suppliers moving that way as well. In fact, in 2006, less than 20% of the automobiles produced in North America were produced south of Ohio. By 2014, that was over 50% and continuing to grow. Now, I think that there's a lot of issues around why businesses are locating in Mexico. It has to do with wages. It has a lot to do with trade agreements there'll be another discussion someday. But I think that your companies have chosen to locate in Kentucky. So how do you, at least in the operations you have here, why Kentucky? How's that work? How's it viewed in your infrastructure?
I think similar to maybe Kurt's company, and also if you look at Toyota, I think the plant in Harrodsburg was the first automotive manufacturing plant that we built outside of Japan.
Isn't that interesting?
Yes, and 32 years ago. So we actually the guy who actually found that area and decided to be in Harrodsburg, a really good friend of mine, and he said that basically a couple reasons, and one's really interesting. One reason is absolutely the geography. We were Nissan is our number one customer, so we located there. We have easy access to the Nissan plants. We have great access to I-75. We're in the middle to support our northern customers, our southern customers, and then we also have I-64. So we geographically. But the second reason is really interesting is that I lived in Japan, as you said, for 3 or 4 years, and I lived some of that time in our founding area, which is called Ibaraki, and a lot of people think Ibaraki really reminds them of Kentucky.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I think when you talk to Mr. Ide-san, who said he made that decision, geography was really important, but he said it felt like home.
Really?
Yes, absolutely.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
How about Kentucky for INOAC?
Well, it's kind of interesting to hear Doug share that perspective from your ownership as well. Yeah. Doug and I just actually met today for the first time, although we've been involved in the association via telephone and whatnot. But our ownership had the same perspective as well. So I can tell you that our plants, with the exception of what we've got in Monterrey, Mexico, are in fairly rural, open areas. Our company founded its operation in North America in Bardstown, Kentucky. So population today is about 5,000 people within the city limits, and expanded 3 years later into Springfield. And so we're about 2,600 people. So fairly rural. We were the first large companies, large manufacturers to establish a footprint in either of those two locations. And of course, at the time, it was really nice because what we were finding, and our ownerships found this as well, was that there was a lot of people in those local home communities who wanted to stay there. These were farming communities where people didn't have insurance, and they were kind of living off the land and dependent upon weather and crops and those sorts of things. And so by establishing a manufacturing operation that not only brought good wages and also health insurance, which people, of course, didn't have access to at the time because most were self-employed being farmers and whatnot, the second wage earner of the house came to join us. We find, as we look at the demographics of our companies here in Kentucky, that most of those who have been with us long term are people who are approaching retirement age, which of course is our next challenge, and tend to be female because most of their husbands were tending to things at home and those sorts of things. So they became the second wage earner. They were the ones that were able to provide insurance for the family members, which they otherwise would have had. We go over to Japan and we see the same kinds of things. When we travel to the plants there, you sort of kind of go through little small towns, and all of a sudden you see in the far distance, up sort of on a mountainside, is another INOAC plant. And so it's the same type of thing. We like to build our business around communities and really be a significant player within the community itself. So it's all very strategic.
Yeah, I think a lot of automotive companies tend to do that regionally, where we build, where we sell to a large degree. But it is encouraging, as we talked a moment ago about exports, that we do export so much in the state of Kentucky. Kurt, you hit on an interesting point, this idea of building in rural areas where there's people who want to work where they grew up. Rusty made the point about Eastern Kentuckians want to stay where they are, and he used the term hillbillies, and that I find that to be true. I had the privilege to work in a lot of different places with General Motors, but I found when I came to Kentucky that employees want to work where they grew up, where they went to school, where their families are, and where their church is and their schools and all those kind of things, and so I think that's an opportunity we have as we work on this workforce issue. We got to be thinking about those kinds of things, about how do we create the skill sets in those areas where we are, and we'll get to that in a minute too. I think we are blessed here in Kentucky. Doug, you hit on it geographically. We're ideally positioned to service the automotive industry to the north, Michigan, Ohio, Indiana, Ontario, and ideally positioned to service the industry to the south. But our highways, I-65, I-75, become incredibly important to that. North-south, the I-69 corridor. I saw Lee Lingo last night. If we can continue to work on that, we'd have an uninterrupted interstate highway from Michigan all the way to El Paso, Texas. That would be a big enabler for our business as well. So we're a big fan of the infrastructure issues that David was speaking of earlier as well. So automotive sales have done really, really well the last couple of years. In fact, we're coming off 2 record years of consecutive automotive sales. How does Hitachi see the sales environment currently? Doug?
Yeah, I think if you look U.S. sales, for example, I think in 2015, as you're referring to, 2015, 2016, we were over 17 million cars sold in the U.S. I think the forecast even for 2016 was about 17.8 million, and I think we ended up about 17.5 million. Now, I think if you look at the latest forecast for 2017, we're about 16.5 million or so. So people look at that and say, well, we've got, a correction, or sales have softened. But when you really look back at history, we have to go back probably to 1999 or 2000 to see car sales over 17 million. And if you look past that, in the 80s, in the early 80s and the 70s, car sales even went to single digit, right? 9 million cars or 10 million cars or 11 million cars. So to say that moving from 17.5 million to 16.5 million, that car sales are softening, it's absolutely a very strong market.
Yeah.
And all the fuel prices, interest rates, unemployment rates, everything is very, positive for good car sales. So for us, we're optimistic that car sales are strong. I think, maybe this year, next year, you will see that 16 million range. But, it's projected that 19 and 20 will go back. But for us also, we have to look at, and you know this very well, Dave, it's not necessarily the total car sales, it's what you sell.
Yeah.
So for us, we are very involved in electrification. We're very involved in autonomous. We're very involved in a lot of the new technology. So for us, sales are really strong.
Mm-hmm. Good. Kurt, how does INOAC see the current sales environment and going forward?
I would agree that, again, to echo Doug's points, there is some very light softening that's out there. I don't know that we are overly concerned about that. We certainly haven't put any contingency plans in place in terms of workforce or any of those types of things. Right. What we are looking for, it actually sort of kind of forces us to do things internally a little bit differently, is a little bit more vertical integration in terms of the types of products that we actually make for our customers. Mm-hmm. So it sort of forces us to kind of look at products that we produce today or how we have historically produced products, and it forces us to have different parts of our business segments come together more than they have in the past. So I mentioned earlier about, we do a lot of foaming work. So now we're finding that our automotive components, which primarily, are comprised of plastics, Now there's a lot more integration with foam as well. And a lot of this comes to do with lightweighting and those types of things.
Right.
So we actually have found this to be actually quite an interesting opportunity for us. So again, as I said in the beginning, we're not looking at this as a significant threat in terms of our business or our people, but more as an opportunity in terms of how we do the integration internally.
Since both of you guys have hit on something that, as a OEM guy, I think about car sales, right? I think about the upper end of it. But both of you have suggested that perhaps intuitive and perceptive and adaptive companies find opportunities in that. Right. Now, I don't think that, and the reason I wanted to talk about this subject is I don't think anybody would be wringing their hands over a softening in automotive sales. I think we're still in a very strong market. I think we see that strong market continue for a number of years, particularly globally. I think North America is probably going to be a little bit flatter. But I think that the opportunities for us to continue to grow and expand and to win in this industry are still very, very good. And I appreciate hearing about that. You go into some of these plants around Kentucky. One of the great privileges I have with this position is I get to visit suppliers all over the state. In fact, my office is my truck. I get a lot of windshield time in this wonderful state. But you go into some of these factories around the state, and the most incredibly advanced manufacturing technology exists in our automotive plants. Both you guys are examples of that. I've been through both your plants and both your operations, and it might just be an old Butler Steel building in Glasgow, Kentucky. But I'm telling you what, there's some incredibly advanced manufacturing technology going into it, and we have to think about that in the challenges that we face. Dave talked about those earlier in terms of the 7 priorities. I think that stuff, those issues are really important to who we are. Now, Kurt, you heard Dave's presentation. I don't think you were here yet, but your reaction to some of the issues we face in the state as opportunities for our business.
Well, I think again, my primary area of focus within my scope of my position with INOAC is in human resources. So, when I came into the room today and I saw the large contingency of the SHRM people here, so I'm probably going to echo a lot of the things that they would say and others who are involved in manufacturing. It's in workforce development, and it's in training, and it's dealing with 4 or 5 converging generations that we have within the workforce as well. So we've of course struggled with, as many organizations have, small and large, with recruiting and turnover and those sorts of things, and we've purposefully focused our attention on retention. We're looking at what are the causes and what are the drivers of people looking for other opportunities in other places. And so we've put some procedures and some plans and some strategies in place to keep people with us long term. One of the things that we are definitely going hard and fast at, and it's very important, is really getting into the school systems at a much earlier stage. We, like most companies, cannot afford to sit back and wait for people to come to us and apply for a position when they're about to graduate high school or have graduated high school. Yeah. With new technologies and work that is interesting, again, we use, within the association itself, automotive is not anymore dirty, dark, and dangerous, which is what it was when my father was growing up in manufacturing, 30, 40, 50 years ago. There's automation, the plants are air conditioned now, so what we've done is we've sort of embraced the opportunities to bring younger people from schools, starting at the 8th grade, bringing them into the plants, taking them on plant tours, showing them robotics, showing them automation, showing them clean facilities. 15, 20 years ago, we had people, taking things out of injection presses. Now it's a lot more interesting. Most of the kids are walking around doing something like this every day, and that's what our PLC programmers are doing as well, as they're programming the robotics.
So are the guys in Eastern Kentucky.
So we're trying to show them, the things that you enjoy doing that are challenging and interesting, and can give you a good career. And you, again, as we mentioned earlier, you don't necessarily need a 4-year degree, but bring them into the work environment sooner rather than later to give them some ideas.
Great. As long as we're going on this workforce thing, talk to me about workforce. You got some cool stuff going on at Hitachi.
Yeah, but you asked an HR guy that question before you asked a plant guy, so that's kind of hard to follow.
Well, no, he took it. Remember, I didn't ask. He took it.
Okay, he ran with it. I think if you look, a good example in the Harrodsburg, absolutely our challenge is the same as Kurt mentioned. We've had rapid growth. 600 people for us in 5 years is pretty rapid growth. Being able to retain and recruit, retain talented staff is absolutely our number one problem. Sales is not a problem. Business growth not a problem.
No, right.
The problem is being able to get the right people, keep those people. So we're doing a lot of the same things that Kurt mentioned. We just now are finishing a new building on campus in Harrodsburg that will be our regional training center,
Right.
working with local vocational schools to be able to do maintenance training, like technician type training, robotics, motor controls, the basic type trainings, and also supervisory type trainings for, entry-level management and some of those things. So, we've really changed our focus to start trying to develop more people ourselves, get people interested in technology that we have. I mentioned earlier, we have an activity that I'm doing now, had a session last night, have a session actually tonight. I'm meeting with a group of team members at each plant on each shift, and the demographics that we're really having trouble with keeping 18 to 25 years old, 0 to 5 years experience. And then the technical side also. Of course, engineering is always a challenge, but technician maintenance. So really two areas.
Yeah.
But if you look at the side that the team member demographic of 18 to 25 years old, I'm meeting with that group now, and I told you earlier, a lot of really good feedback. I sit down with that group, they don't really care. They could care less who I am.
Yeah.
So they open up, they talk
Unvarnished
about
truth.
Yeah, absolutely. They have no filter, and I'm learning a lot. And right now, the focus, Kurt, is about communication. We've always communicated to our employees. We send out emails. We ask supervisors to share that information. We post it on television screens or in team cells. But now they want an app.
Yeah.
Now they want to be able to access that communication anytime they want to do that. So, we're learning a lot about that group, and we're going to make some changes to try to retain that group.
Yeah, I think it's important to note here, as we talk about workforce, which is really, quite frankly, the biggest problem we face. I look at the 7 issues that Dave spoke of earlier, and in fact, I shook his hand in the break and said, we agree. Those are the priorities for our Kentucky state government. But workforce is really where we struggle. Our problem is not only replace or getting workers into jobs that are available with the technical skills they need, but our problem is exacerbated by the fact that, notwithstanding our friends here in Louisville, Ford, who's been here over 100 years, but Toyota and General Motors and many hundreds of suppliers have been in the state for about 30 or 35 years. Well, the average career path in an automotive business is about 30 to 35 years. So we have a huge attrition curve coming at us as well. And that attrition curve is not just workers leaving jobs, it's huge amounts of knowledge leaving. And so I think what you're seeing, and to all of you, the message is this: we get the problem. We're a little bit like the frog in the pot of hot water. It wasn't hot, and we sat in here and we just burnt. But all of a sudden we said, holy crap, we got to do something. And our businesses, our industries are stepping out into local school systems, into community colleges, into other places, and saying, okay, now we need to partner. Okay, it used to be we'd sit back and say, oh, send us your best ones, we'll take them. And now we've got to go out and do things with the community, with the school systems, with educators, with others throughout, and K-12 all the way through university, to bring to bear the issues that we face. Kurt, I knew you were involved in the initial forming of Kentucky Fame. Why don't you talk about Kentucky Fame? Many people in the audience, I'm sure, know of that, but it really was an automotive initiative born out of our friends at Toyota.
Right. So Kentucky Fame, which has expanded significantly and very rapidly throughout the state. I had the good fortune to be asked to lead the local to Lincoln Trail chapter, which was a terrific experience, and it really was a great opportunity to bring together key stakeholders in launching that. And as Dave has mentioned, Toyota really was kind of the key architect in doing that. And it was mentioned earlier in terms of essential skills and soft skills. I remember having been invited to the Toyota Georgetown facility to see what was called at that time AMT, which is now turned into Kentucky Fame. And I thought what I was going to see was a group of students who were going to be programming and doing work and those sorts of things, when in fact the reality in my head was I need people who can, one, come to work drug-free, come to work on the first day, and even more importantly, come to work the second day. And oh, by the way, they can communicate and they can articulate and they can participate as a member of a cohesive, collaborative team. And so I remember we sort of met in a big training room, and then we went out to the floor, and we met the first group of students, and they're featured in some of the Kentucky Fame videos today that are out there on the website. And they were the most articulate, collaborative group of people who presented to a bunch of people who were standing in front of them in suits for the first time. I walked back in and I said, this is exactly what we need. So having been the local chapter president, obviously there was a seat on the state board, which was great, because everyone had to tweak their chapters a little bit differently based on geography and whatnot. But it was a great partnership between manufacturers, economic development, and I cannot say enough for our great state college system.
Yeah.
They are just, if it weren't for KCTCS and the leadership that we are fortunate to have there, I think INOAC itself, particularly in Springfield and Bardstown, would be a very different organization today than it was before because of the success and the partnership that we've had with them. But again, Kentucky Fame is industry-led, but it's supported by the education system and by economic development, and of course by CAM as well. So it's a terrific organization.
Yeah, you mentioned the growth of Kentucky Fame, and that growth wouldn't have occurred if we didn't have a closely connected, linked community college system.
Correct.
The KCTCS campuses across the state were willing to transfer curriculum from one to the other. It was a copy and paste, and it was really a great thing. So Kurt just kind of hit on this thing with what the millennials are telling us. What are you finding out? I mean, you're talking directly to them. You're getting. I mean, last night you got some feedback. You get some more feedback.
I can't tell you everything.
But I mean, what's really?
I think a couple differences that we've really noticed. One is communication. Again, they're really how they want to be communicated to is different than in the past. I mean, I grew up in a generation that you come to work, you be happy you got a job, those type of things. And now we see that, again, communication is really important. They really wanted to know more about the career path. They wanted to know that, hey, I may not want to be out on the assembly line my entire career, which, that's okay. But how do I move toward being a technician? How do I move toward being a maintenance? How do I move toward IT? I think they were really worried about career opportunities other than being on the assembly line, which is, again, okay. I think they were really worried about communication. Those seem to be really the things that they talked about more so than anything. So
that's interesting. We're in a position now where the source of our employees is a demographic with whom we are by and large unfamiliar with.
Absolutely.
We in leadership, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
And so I think one of the challenges that we face is sort of relearning that paradigm, relearning how we manage and lead people that see the world through a different lens. Right. I mean, all of you with kids know what I'm talking about. I mean, a house with a teenager has a system administrator in it, right, for their IT systems. If it's just me and my wife, it ain't going to happen. But I think those realizations are where we're coming to now as we try to work on this workforce issue in the state. Now, don't get me wrong. There's hundreds of initiatives going on across the state. Many of them we're involved in. But my message today on that is that, and you're hearing it from Kurt and Doug, we want to play. We want to be a part of that solution set. We don't want to just sit back and say, send us your best, and we'll hire them. Do you see much of a problem in your region, Kurt, with employees, for lack of a better term, job hopping, moving and chasing overtime from company to company, or chasing? I mean, is that an issue?
Yes. Again, as I mentioned earlier, we established our Kentucky footprint in 1988 and then expanded into next county over in 1991. So just under 85% of our workforce comes within 3 counties, within 20 minutes of each other. So back to my earlier point is lots of our people want to stay really close to home. It's really convenient. Yes, we've had people obviously elect to leave our company and go to other companies, and we, like everyone else in the area, we stay kind of abreast as to what competing wages are and those sorts of things. What we've started to do, and we had a very old legacy policy of once you leave the company you can't come back, so we had a no rehire policy, which didn't make a whole lot of sense. That's fine when you were the only game in town 25 years ago, but you can't do that today. Right. There's too much employment competition. So we've dusted off a lot of those policies, and what we've done is, to the extent that we have had team members who have left us to go to another company and call us a week or two later and ask if they can come back, sometimes we say yes, and sometimes we say no. But to the ones that we say yes, we turn them into our own ambassadors. So what they have to do is at the next plant meeting, they have agreed when we bring them back that they will speak at the plant meeting and explain that they left this company our company, a month ago.
It's really good.
And then they now have to explain where they went, what the experience was, and why they've chosen to come back. So that has actually proven to be a very good technique that we have used to persuade other people not to leave. And they have to hear it from each other. So I can sit in a plant meeting and explain all the reasons why. Sorry, you don't want to go to Hitachi. It was hypothetically, of course.
Don't worry,
right?
I'm going to steal your idea.
Right.
Shamelessly.
But I mean, the key is if we all sort of kind of keep our own and take care of our own and retain our own, some of this problem will go away. But so we use them as our own ambassadors or as our own recruiters and as our own advocates, because I can do it, but I'm not out on the line with them all the time. But if we can take those folks and they talk all the time and they've got lots of friends and they've got lots of colleagues and they've got lots of family, that's been our best source of retention.
Great idea.
Hey, it is. I'm so lucky to hang out with smart guys like you. I learn something every day. Do you see that kind of job hopping thing in Harrodsburg? Or Berea?
We see that. I think very similar, but more so we see that lately with the technical staff. More so, maintenance has been. And we can talk about that in more detail. But I think the route of going to a vocational school and going that technical route has really changed a lot over the years. And there's a tremendous shortage in maintenance and technician staff. Engineering has always been a challenge, and it most likely always will be a challenge. But maintenance has been the biggest challenge for us. There's a big shortage of that in our area, and maintenance people more so than any have been job hopping.
Yeah, I think so. Okay, so we spent a lot of time talking about the automotive industry in the state of Kentucky, and based on a couple of questions I got this morning from people who knew that I was in the automotive business, we probably ought to merge into some of the kind of cool stuff that's going on. Obviously, the whole face of mobility is changing in our world, and it's changing at a pace that I sat here yesterday, listened to this futurist talk, and I'm thinking, man, we're living that. We're living that in our industry in a way that I have never seen after being in it for so long. So, Kurt, talk for a moment about the way that INOAC is regarding autonomous vehicles and the fuel economy regulations and ride sharing like Lyft and Uber and those kinds of things. How does that? I mean, are you trying to anticipate those things?
Yeah, I would say at this point, and it's interesting, we had a strategic planning meeting this week with our senior leadership group, and that was one of the subjects of the conversation. And I would say from our perspective, again, I don't know that this is true for other suppliers or even for the OEMs to that extent, but I think we're a little bit mixed on kind of what the future really looks like and how quickly that will come about. I think that we are certainly, at least from an engineering standpoint, our engineers are really embedded with the engineers at our OEMs and trying to understand the types of solutions that they're looking at for the future. We've seen some models and some prototypes in terms of what automobiles will look like. We have to do that, not only because we have to start thinking about what are the new types of components that we might find ourselves making, but what are those materials going to be? They have to be lighter weight, they might have more foam, they have less plastic, more aluminum, less steel. But also some of the legacy products that we found ourselves making may be obsolete.
Right.
Headrests. I mean, we've seen prototypes of some automobiles that look like limousines, and people just are sort of sitting in there. Now, is that going to be 10 years out or 25 years out? I don't know that I'll see it. I may. I'm actually a whole lot older than you think.
So we're looking at mileage.
So we're looking at those things, and obviously we're staying very closely engaged with the OEMs and those engineers to understand what that's going to look like. But it certainly is going to be different.
Now, interesting, Doug. Your company is obviously involved at the forefront of much of that technology.
Yeah,
I mean, you guys are applauding the changes for autonomous and other things. So, how does Hitachi see in this changing face of mobility?
Yeah, I think when you look at autonomous or automation, vehicle automation, it's really classified in level 0 to level 5.
Right.
And level 0 being basically no automation. Level 5 meaning no steering wheel, no accelerator. And in the middle, it really advances based on the kind of the responsibility of the driver versus the car. So when you look at level 1, pretty basic, adaptive cruise control and some of the things that are involved in level 1. Level 2 and level 3, you really get into more autonomous driving. You get into automatic acceleration, steering. You get into, which we see today, automatic parking, which, in theory is fully autonomous, in a controlled environment. But we see now the safe, we see driver kind of following the vehicle in front of you at they call safe following speed. So basically, your car at a safe speed will follow the car in front of you. It will steer, it will accelerate, it will brake, and it will keep you in between the lines. So, that's really level 3. Level 4 is full autonomous, but in a controlled environment. Maybe daytime,
The Tesla.
weather conditions, Tesla type application.
Montana freeway.
Right. So that's level 4. Again, level 5 is full automation. So I guess it's debatable, but today we're probably in the level 2, level 3 range.
Sure.
And Hitachi is the same. We're mass producing level 2. We're designing and developing level 3. But I think today, again, we're somewhere level 2, level 3. So the question is, when and how do you get from level 3 to level 5?
Right.
I think that the two, challenges. One, a technology challenge. Cars will be connected. Your car will communicate to another car. I think Cadillac maybe has the ability. Cadillac can talk to a Cadillac.
Right.
But I think connectivity between vehicles. I think connectivity to traffic lights. Connectivity to the highway, which we're seeing in some areas already.
Right.
I think that's one side of the equation that has to be solved. I think the other is highway infrastructure. Vision systems rely heavily on yellow lines, white lines, double lines,
dashes.
And just driving to the hotel, there's areas where the white line is completely missing. So that type of infrastructure, is a challenge. So I think absolutely there's a gap between probably level 3, level 4. There's some technology challenges, there's some infrastructure challenges, but there's a lot of really, really smart companies that are investing a lot of resources. And not just automotive.
Right.
Google's a player, Apple's a player. So I think the gap's going to be closed pretty quickly. Most people estimate that the level 4 gap may be closed by year 2022, and level 5 gap may be closed by level 2025. So
I've heard those too.
yeah. So yeah, it's pretty incredible. Just in your career, our career,
Right.
how much we've advanced in the last 10 years, 5 years.
You bet. Let's take a look at this, sort of combine a couple of elements of our discussion. You've been learning a lot about millennials. I have a 28-year-old son who doesn't even have a driver's license because he doesn't see the need for it.
Wow.
So as we look at the changing face of mobility, how do you see things like ride sharing and I mean, when we were 16 years old, we couldn't wait to get a driver's license. I got a kid who's waited 12 years, hasn't done anything about it yet. How do you see ride sharing and Lyft, Uber, those kinds of things affecting our automotive sales business? I mean,
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure I know the answer, but really good question.
Well, come on, you should.
I used my first Uber the other day. I thought it was pretty incredible, actually.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say that. I want people to buy cars, but pretty incredible.
But that's the point. Uber drivers buy cars.
Right. That's true. That's true. But Lyft, a good example. I think there's some applications now. I know we're actually discussing that, but there's actually a strategy now for Lyft to have fully autonomous cars in certain conditions.
Right.
Maybe good weather, maybe daytime, but they send a car out to get you, and the car takes you wherever you want to go, but there is no driver.
Yeah.
So, I'm not sure how that will affect the automotive business, but it's the technology that is happening, and we've got to learn to adapt. We've got to learn to be a part of those cars, those vehicles.
Right. Yeah, we want to be the solution set, not the albatross.
That's right.
But it is interesting. I mean, when you think about ride-sharing services like Lyft and Uber, potentially that opens up a whole new demographic of people who would be driving who might not otherwise be driving, right? I mean, think about, okay, so I've got an aging dad. He drives, but not very well, and he drives 2,000 miles a year now, but he could I can't quite picture him being an app on a telephone, but he could call an Uber service or something like that and use miles that he might not otherwise use. Similarly, young kids. We cart our kids all over the place for soccer practice and this. How about we use Uber to do that? All of a sudden, there's a couple of demographics open up. Well, we've about used up our time here. I knew this would happen. I knew we could go on forever, and nobody's asleep out there that I can see, so I think we've done okay between now and lunch. But we have a couple of minutes between now and the time that we've got to actually cut this thing off so y'all get to lunch. Anybody got any questions for any of us about automotive or automotive business? You want to talk about college football? We can do that. Yes, ma'am.
I'll ask a quick question. I'm Leslie Smart with Kentucky One Health and here with Leadership Kentucky. I'm going to move to politics a little bit. Of course, hot on the Trump agenda is the issue of steel and trade. And I'm curious about your all's position as it relates to national security.
Well, my opinion, and I think shared by many of my colleagues, I won't speak to that, is that I'm not sure that the steel policy issue is as much a national security issue as the current administration would like it to be. It's a real issue, don't get me wrong. I mean, I forget how many years ago, 15 years ago or something, China was producing about, I don't know, 50 or 60 million tons of steel a year. We were doing about 120. The U.S. now is doing 80 million tons of steel. China's doing almost 500 million tons of steel. So the reality is that we have global overcapacity in the steel business, and my opinion would be market forces will shake that out, as well as better than a security policy. But you know, I mean, we heard last night it's a circus in D.C. and you know, and I often say that these guys, they talk to themselves so much that it's like. But if it's a miss to them, it's a fog to us. I mean, we got no idea what's going to come of that. But it's a great question. It remains to be debated out in the political arena, I think. And unfortunately for our steel manufacturers, they've taken it on the chin in a big way. I don't know that protectionism is the right strategy. Thanks for asking.